Today, I do have the pleasure of introducing our keynote panel in a discussion centered around harmony in cybersecurity. Certainly a theme that's befitting of our venue here in Music City, USA. But as you can imagine, among our planning committee, the debate ensued. What does harmony in cybersecurity really mean? We talked about the idea of motivation, integration, as well as innovation as a mechanism for trying to improve security in all of our businesses as well as our profession. And today our discussion will be based around these ideas and how our distinguished keynotes have accomplished this in their organization. With that, I'd like to introduce Julia King, Executive Editor of Computerworld, who will moderate our discussion today, along with Paul Connelly, Vice President in Information Privacy and Security, Vice President of Information Privacy and Security with the Hospital Corporation of America, Scott Mackelprang, Chief Security Officer of Asurion, and Bill Burns, Director of Information Security of Netflix. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying your lunch, and I hope you're also able to eat quietly. We just had a few little considerations to take into account here. Apparently, some people can't hear. So if you can't hear, raise your hand. Is everybody okay in terms of volume? You can't hear? There's also room up front, too, if you can't. So anyway, I'm Julia King. I'm an executive editor at Computerworld. I'm absolutely delighted to be here and thank the ISSA for the opportunity to moderate this panel. I love the abstract for this panel, which is motivating, innovating, and integrating security as a vital part of today's organizations. And the reason I love it so much is it very conveniently leads me to my first question of our distinguished panelists here. We're lucky to have very smart and very experienced folks to take questions here. And I also want to let you know that there'll be time for questions from the audience. And we do have someone collecting the audience if you tweet those, and they'll be provided to me. But gentlemen, let's start with an overall question here. It seems that security teams are perennially responding to innovations in other technologies. Web applications, new developments in wireless and mobile, software as a service, the cloud. And I'd like to flip the equation and talk about how you, as your organization's security leaders, are leading with security. Tell us a little bit about your approach to overall security strategy so that innovation across the enterprise isn't held up by the security implications. And Bill, you're shaking your head. I'm going to start with you.
Okay. First, thanks everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules to come here, network with folks, share your experiences, learn from others. This is really important. This is very similar to what I do in my company, where I'm constantly having conversations with the business owners, the various technical folks, and it's a selling security. It's me understanding the business. And that's really the heart of of how we implement security into the automation, into the workflows, and that's really the key that we see transforming from security as an inhibitor or a roadblock to security as an enabler. So we provide capabilities to some of our business units, insights they didn't have before, but we also try to automate the security controls as deeply as we can into the infrastructure, into the applications, so that it's not a serialized workflow. It's not this team and then security. We're part of that conversation. We're part of the orchestration.
So you're part of the business process right up front.
Exactly, and the business values that, so they don't have to worry about, oh, we forgot to add the security component. It's we're racing to the finish line to meet some deliverable, and everyone is part of that race.
So what does this look like on a day-to-day level in terms of security being integrated into application development or support? How do your team members integrate in the business unit, or are they in a separate security unit?
So we have a pretty decentralized culture with all aspects, including security. So there are 3 security leads, for instance, in our company, but each of the team members that report to us are working closely with a developer or a marketing person or another analyst in another group. So it's not a ticket-driven system. It's more conversational.
Scott, I'm going to turn to you and ask you to tell us a little bit about your strategic vision for leading with security.
I don't know how many of you have worked for an organization that is immature in its development processes overall, but I've worked with one before, and what you see is that those kinds of organizations are not good at development in general. Security is just one of a whole bunch of requirements. They may be non-functional requirements, but it's just like DR, it's like capacity, it's like high availability. And so the conversation that you need to have is with the business about security being one of the core components of the development process. And then, after all, innovation is just development. It's new stuff that's coming out, and there's a way to do that. Some companies I've seen that I've actually been associated with have labs where they try to do innovation in a broken apart place where people think grand thoughts, bake something up, and kind of unleash it on the business. That's harder to integrate, but integrate you must. You need to not just integrate, but be part of that process. I think the best answer from my perspective is get to the point with the business where security is considered a part of the basic process, where you have architectural reviews and you have someone at the table for the review, both at the conceptual as well as at the various phases throughout the SDLC, and security is a core component of that. And innovation is just another part of development. Some of it is innovative and some of it is not so much.
Paul?
Well, I've been kind of mentally taking notes on both of your answers. I think our strategy is actually very similar, where I think there's kind of 2 sides to it. On one side, there's elements of security and privacy that need to be baked into solutions, and we have to constantly be looking at technology and capability and looking at how do we get better, what are new opportunities to get better. But then the other side of it is, how do you apply that? And to me, innovation and integration really go hand in hand. I mean, from our perspective, we've got to be integrated into the business units so that we understand their goals and what the key issues are that they're trying to address and where they're going with their strategies, so that we can then, hand in hand with them, be working going forward and developing the security elements of their solutions as part of it, rather than an add-on after the fact. One thing that we did this year, I've been at HCA almost 11 years. In the first 10 years, I was reporting to the CIO, and we were part of the IT organization. And early this year, we actually made a change where we took sort of the strategic elements and moved it out of IT and made it a business unit. And the whole idea was to make the point that this is not just an IT thing, it's a business thing, and gives us an opportunity to be more integrated with the various business units going forward.
Just to get a level set here, I'm curious, just by a show of hands, how many organizations here, how many folks here report in through IT as security? How many don't? Interesting. Because that's one of the things that we're seeing more and more at Computerworld in terms of interviews that we do with folks, that security is slowly but surely moving out of IT and into the business units. So in the traditional security model, you build a corporate network, then you populate it with applications and business data that you typically access from inside the firewall. But now users are bringing any device at all. It has to be supported from outside the firewall. We're also seeing more software as a service, best-of-breed applications, all of these being developed, again, outside the firewall. How does this change the overall role and functions of the security organization? And can you address how specifically you and your teams are moving from a mode of protection to more of a mode of enablement?
I'll start.
Go.
So one of the interesting things about moving from this sort of perimeter-based defense where you have stuff on the inside and people on the outside, so we're moving to a model where our stuff is on the outside and our people are already on the outside. There is no firewall in and out mentality. The controls are really closer to the data. So the perimeter, the data is the new perimeter in our thinking. So we need to move these controls closer to the data, closer to the applications, whether they're inside the firewall or at some best-of-breed SaaS application. So the basics are the same. So we still do evaluations, we still do risk analysis, we still do testing. It's just that we're interacting with a different team. So I'm not interacting with the team running the application who maybe appear to my organization. I'm working with the business unit that we're procuring this service from. And again, we do, we have contractual obligations, but then we also do technical tests and other analysis. So a lot of the controls are the same in spirit. It's just the application of how you do some of those tests. Those are different.
I would echo that the data is really where your focus is driven once you get to the point where there is no perimeter. The data is what you manage. And one thing that I've noticed over the last 5 years is the outside providers, because they oftentimes are able to execute more quickly because they're not as concerned about some of the other things that IT is. Capacity, DR, things like that. Sometimes organizations within the business will actually go outside and go around IT. And in that case, data is the key. That's how you manage that. And I think this also gets to the same kind of conversation around the devices that people want to bring into your organization. That also destroys your perimeter. And so, once again, it's about containing the data so that the data, and then also those packets that are on the outside, just how intimate they become with your inside. And there's a whole conversation to have around that.
I agree with both of your thoughts, and the only thing that I would add is, one of the struggles from my perspective was the sort of the mental side of it, being willing to be open to some of these ideas. I mean, I think deep down inside of me somewhere is this, the jackbooted prison guard mindset, and every once in a while it still comes to the surface. And I know in our case, as a healthcare provider, when the thought of putting data in the cloud first came up, the initial reaction was, of course we can't do that. It's got to be within our own control. But being open to the idea, understanding the impact of the business kind of forced us to open our mind and look at it. And when we dug into it, we found, hey, we really can do this. There's actually benefits even from a security perspective. So it was almost like the mindset was the first thing that we had to change. And then it was going back to your first question, relying on that integration and being open to new ways of doing things. And to your point, Scott, focusing on the data and making sure that we're doing the right things to protect it wherever the infrastructure is, even if it's not, within our walls.
Well, it occurs to me that so much of what everyone has said so far, we're not talking about technology challenges per se, but really organizational challenges and cultural challenges. And I'd like each of you to address how you, as your organization security officer, have addressed the cultural side, the soft side. I mean, security has always been really the techno, sort of off in the distance organization, and here you're being much more integrated into the organization. It would seem that your face to the organization would need to change. So tell me a little bit about, I'm sure our audience would like to know how you're doing this. How are you getting your message across?
So when we talk about the CIA, one of the aspects that most security folks don't spend as much time on, I certainly didn't previously, was availability. And availability is a big deal to a customer-facing application at the scale that we have. And so when we decided to move out of the traditional data center into a public cloud infrastructure as a service model, one of the concerns was availability. And to be honest, you can't just forklift applications out of your data center, put them in the cloud, and expect them to work as better or as good or better without doing a lot of refactoring. And so when we broke down our applications into small, discrete components and made it service-oriented, we took the opportunity to look at availability. And so we, rather than doing big bang sort of disaster recovery drills and business continuity drills, we broke it down into bite-sized chunks, and so we do DR business continuity 24/7. So instances are constantly coming and going out of our infrastructure, and we call that chaos monkey, and that's something that we automated. So DR is not something you plan months for and then execute and then do a postmortem. You're doing this all the time, and this was one of those areas where you could, you're at the crossroads of how do you move into a different infrastructure, a different capability, and do you use the same practices or do you try to develop new practices? And so we took the latter, and we actually used something like public cloud, which is traditionally seen as less control, and we actually used it to our advantage as an opportunity to use it to our advantage.
How about you, Scott? How have you integrated security or changed your processes to accommodate, security as your friend?
Well, I have worked with processes, but one thing that I have done differently later in my career that I put a lot of emphasis on that I didn't initially is that I have made a concerted effort to hire people who have people skills, especially my direct reports. Earlier in my career, I got some really strong technical people who could really make the Pope swear. And so I kind of changed my approach that way, and I now try to hire people who have people skills, certainly at the management level, that are far beyond anything that I thought would be important when I was earlier in my career. From a process standpoint, one thing that I've changed, actually I've been doing this for a while, and it seems to work. One of the most important areas for me in security is software security. Unless you just buy everything that you use, if you develop software, my opinion is half of your security vulnerabilities are coming from the software that you develop. And yet we spend so much time on our firewalls and on our network and intrusion detection and all that stuff that the software kind of goes by the wayside. So an example of how I've done that in the past is I've actually infused my software security people into the organizations. I typically don't hire a bunch of those people. I hire one or two strong leaders, and then they actually go to the meetings, and they are infused with the teams and become part of those teams. And sometimes people wonder where their allegiance really is because they are so much a part of those teams. So I think especially in software security, the development organizations are large, complex. They have a lot of pressures that perhaps security people don't understand. And it's such a big thing for me in terms of the overall security picture for the business that if you do that right, I think it's like 50% of your risk. And it can't be security telling them how to do their job. It has to be they're infused, they have a trust relationship, they go out after work. I've seen them rent a bus together and go to DEF CON. And when they do that kind of stuff, you know that you're having success because it's become a part of their business, not just yours.
Paul, security and privacy is a huge part of the healthcare environment, especially with HIPAA. Tell us a little bit about how culturally you're infusing this security headset into everyone.
Well, it's a great question because technology by no means has been solved. There's obviously still major issues on the technology side, but no matter how well you do technology, if you don't have the right culture, if you don't have the buy-in, if you don't have the kind of environment that you just spoke about, Scott, you're going to be limited in your success. And I guess I don't want to by any means imply that we have solved it where I am, but we've come a long way. And I think that, I guess the words that come to mind to me is you have to be an evangelist 24/7. You always have to be helping educate people on why this is important. You've got to explain that why. There's a big difference to me in the maturity of an organization when you're telling people what to do without telling them the why. And when you can explain why in a way that they understand and they buy into it, then you've got the cultural shift. You've got business leaders who are wanting to do it. And I think looking back over time in our organization, some of what I would consider some of the biggest victories I've felt from a privacy and security perspective are when a business leader is the one who's stepping up saying, we've got to do it this way for security reasons, or we've got to protect this information. And I can just sit back and kind of let them be the ones who are the driver. And I think to get that way, it's constant education, it's constant helping them understand why this is important and how it fits into their part of the business.
I had a breakthrough moment a while back where I had an engineering director come to me and said, I don't understand why I have these functional requirements and innovation that I need to do, and that's a separate track than security patches. Why don't I just integrate all that and call all of that stuff work I need to do that I stage through my QA, my staging, my testing servers? And it was great to have that conversation where he's telling me, why aren't we making patching just part of our development process? I'm like, that sounds like a good idea. We should do that.
That's when you know security's been interwoven into
He's trying to sell me
the
on
bigger
it.
fabric. Yeah.
Those are the meetings where you leave and you go back to your office and close the door and you're like, yes.
Yes. Yeah. My father's in sales, and one thing he told me was that when you're in a negotiation, at some point you stop talking. When you know the deal is closed, like stop talking. So at that point, yes, I was like, stop talking. He's got it.
Excellent. I'm going to open up to the audience. Do we have any questions? We have microphones set up here, and do we have any tweeted questions that we need to address at this point? It's tough to see out there, but I'm going to take that as a no and continue on. But I want to switch gears here a little bit to big data and analytics. Front and center, top of mind at virtually every organization today. Tell us about the new or special security challenges associated with big data in your particular industries and how you're approaching these. And for example, more and more organizations are combining internal data with external data to produce value. How do you reconcile the security here? And the other question that's tied into this is really big data is becoming the heart and soul of many, many organizations' revenue model. So security is becoming front and center there. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that big data and analytics are presenting and how you're addressing those?
Well, I'll start.
Okay.
The challenge is that it makes you feel like a bit of a speed bump in the process of putting the data out there because of exactly what you said. It is the driving element of a lot of companies' revenue plans. Their plans for success are all around commercializing the data. And my experience has been that the data scientists are the most excited of all the people within the company about their job and about how much money they're going to make. And so that's what makes you feel like a little bit of a speed bump because they are so excited. The things that inevitably arise are the questions around environments because you don't put out petabyte test environments. And regulatory concerns. There have been some really good talks in the meetings that I've been in just today about the jurisdictional concerns around your data and also classification of your data and just how mature you are. And I guess I would submit that some of the things that will lead to at least a foundation that can lead to success are some kind of mundane blocking and tackling. You got to have a data classification scheme in place. It needs to be real. You need to know how long you need to retain your data. You need to have a jurisdictional view of who owns the data and where can it be seen, where can it be executed, stored, and the rest. And so for those that are still in the path to arrive, I think a good way to start is doing some of the basic 101 blocking and tackling around things that are hard, about really classifying your data, really having retention schedules, and then getting legal up front to identify the controls and the requirements for the controls so that they have a stake in the game.
Paul, I'm going to turn to you here because I know that in healthcare, a lot of, we're looking at more and more healthcare informatics. I was talking with Eric just prior to the panel, who was at a hospital, and he was talking about how it's no longer the healthcare business, but the healthcare informatics business. And of course, you have lots of privacy regulation, lots of compliance issues around big data. Can you speak to that for us?
Yes, I would say it's one of the top challenges we have in our industry. And at my company, we're one of the biggest healthcare providers in the country, and that gives us the benefit of having data from literally millions, tens of millions of patient encounters every year. And if you put that together, it has an incredible power in terms of the ability to identify ways to improve our care of patients, to reduce costs, to be more efficient, more effective in our delivery. So everybody realizes this incredible value that this has to our company, but at the same time, we're under these compliance regulations and just putting compliance aside, just a matter of trust with our patients, that they know that if they go to one of our hospitals, we're going to take care of them in the hospital bed, but we're also going to take care of them in terms of their personal information. So actually, a lot of what Scott just said applies. I think and it's a work in progress for us right now. I'll be candid to say we're focusing on what is the sensitive data, where is that data going, creating rules about who should have access to it, who are we willing to share it with, how do we, in some cases, de-identify it and use metadata, in other cases where we have to really be able to drill down and see individual patients, how do we separate those requirements? And it's a combination. I mean, there's some technical measures that help us solve that and steps that we can take to provide the right control structure, but then also part of it is just process and the understanding of people when they're working with the data, how sensitive it can be. So I would say definitely a work in progress. We see the value, and I'm very fortunate that the leadership of the company, the business units also recognize that we can't just race out the door with it. We've got to be cautious with it because huge volumes of data also means huge risk with it as well.
And at my company, one of our core competencies is using big data to analyze the movies that people enjoy and to figure out what the next hit could be. And I'll be honest, as a security organization, I feel a little bit behind the curve. So I wish I had more skilled people in the security space who could also do big data analytics. So the math backgrounds, the statistics backgrounds, those are critical skills. So if anyone's looking for sort of the next area, you hear the hype, but in reality, the people trying to use big data in a security context, it's hard work and it's messy, and there aren't a ton of vendors providing out-of-the-box solutions. There's a lot of great toolkits out there, but it's a skill set that I see sort of lacking in the industry. So that's an area. That and automation are two big things that we're trying to constantly hire for. So the company is talking about this capability, and I feel like I'm playing catch up a little bit to use that capability to our advantage.
Well, before I go to the next question, what is the next big hit so we can put it in our Netflix queue?
Yes. I was told I could take the fifth.
Okay. Well, actually, you conveniently are leading me to my transition question, which has to do just about that, skills. Security is front and center with big data as information becomes more of a revenue generator at organizations. So what kind of security skills do you need? Who do you need on your teams? What sorts of certifications do they need, or education do they need, or technology knowledge do they need? And how is that changing? Where are you looking for these folks? Let's hear a little bit about how you're assembling your security dream team.
Well, I'll start. So
Okay.
I just mentioned automation skills, big data and analytics. Those are two critical skills that I see sort of on the cutting edge. Also moving away from, in our particular environment, moving away from specific vendor products or infrastructure, and it's more about what you were mentioning earlier, which is application security and sort of taking a holistic approach. So it's less about the firewalls per se, because in some environments you don't have control of the firewalls or the routing tables anymore. So it's moving closer to the data, closer to the applications, and the infrastructure is something that someone else is going to maintain. Either it's infrastructure or a platform or SaaS. And so it's really understanding, having the ability to communicate at a business level, but also thinking about the application security and not so much about the infrastructure. So I see that evolution happening, and that's the areas that my team is building out.
Scott?
Well, for me, traditionally the positions that I find hardest to fill are exactly that. I was in Los Angeles for a decade and built out a team there, and you'd think that there'd be a lot of talent there, but I went for the better part of a year looking for an application security guy. I'm looking for one now. I looked for one at the last company, and I just broke down and built one. I couldn't hire one, so I found a really good developer, and I put him to school for 8 months. And he was one of the best developers that we had, and not every developer is going to be willing to do that. But even now, as I look for that kind of talent, developers, because they've had experiences with security that have not always been great, they may not want to go to the dark side. So you have to convince them. But frankly, it's a fantastic career path, because if you know development and you know security, there's a lot of demand for that in the right kind of industries, and the right kind means actually most kinds. But even the small companies need this, and the big companies have formalized it to some extent. So that's a really hard one, and I'll just talk about that one and let it go. There are others. I'm in the process of building a team right now, and so I'm buying a little bit of everything, but that's the hardest one. And we really need to reach out to our development brethren and help them understand that what the needs are, and then cross-pollinate. And I, by the way, don't believe that the right answer for that problem is to build a big security organization full of a bunch of development people. The right answer is to have a good, solid leader with great people skills and organizational skills, and then pollinate people within the development organizations and make a dotted line relationship to your leader and let them grow their own skills, because they need to own it. I mean, it is, after all, security is a requirement of their software that they need to meet, and we shouldn't be a QA function at the end of the line.
Well, tell us a little bit about your security dream team.
Well, since half my team is here, I have to say that I've already got it. I second everything that Scott just said, and Bill as well. I think you still need the traditional security skills. I mean, I don't feel like we're so far out of the woods from a technology perspective that we don't need engineers and people who, you know, can really dig down into policy and understand risk management and things like that. But I agree, and it's funny, I was actually in a meeting this morning where we talked about, wow, we really need somebody on the application development team to be our champion for security and baking it into their processes, talking about big data. And it's that kind of skill, and people who, we refer to them as architects, and within our team, we use the architect designation to mean somebody who has a really good understanding of the technology, but also has an understanding of the business. And to a point Scott made, I think, in the very first question, you know, the people skills to be able to communicate, because so much of what we do depends on the people on the other side of the table, whether it's IT developers or it's a business leader, for them to understand why this is important and buy into it and be willing to do it. And I'll just throw out one quick example. We started a really neat thing at HCA within the IT organization a couple years ago, because we sit back in Nashville and we have hospitals all over the country, and we call it the IT healthcare connection, where on a rotational basis we'll take a group of 8 people and they go out and they spend a week in one of our hospitals following the path of a patient, whether they come in through the emergency department or they have an appointment, and you see the activity. You're standing there next to the physicians and the nurses, and that just builds a business understanding that we also feel like you talk about starting with more junior people maybe and building the skills into them. That's another element of it that I think is really important, is building the understanding of what our business is all about. I mean, we're not a security company. We're here to do this, and I think that's been a big part of the development as well.
Right. I'll go to the audience again. Do we have questions? Anyone have a question for any of our panelists? We have one here. Could you go to a mic so we could all hear you?
So, hi everyone. My name is Abdurrahman. I'm from SABIC. My question to you, gentlemen, regarding where do you see, because I think we all heard your feedback about the lack of having expertise of security within the organization and building the skill sets required for that. So my question is, where do you see the security managed services part of the security organization? How do they fit in the strategic approach of security? So do you think them as a strategic approach, or it should be like just temporary till you build your own internal skill set for your organization?
How are you incorporating security managed services into your overall strategic plans, if at all? Was that indeed the question?
I would just say that to me, you almost have to look at it the same way as you would look at potentially using a cloud service provider. There are cases where they could actually provide better caliber services than you'd be able to build internally. So sometimes maybe that is a short-term stopgap effort until you're able to build up your own capabilities, or maybe there's some cases where you just decide that that's going to be a better approach, or maybe it's more cost-effective. So I guess I would say I think you have to be open to everything, and always look case by case at what's going to do the best job of meeting your objectives. I would say from our perspective, we don't necessarily rule it out. I can't say that we even have a single instance of doing that today, but that doesn't mean that we rule it out, tomorrow if a new situation comes up where potentially we would need to.
I guess I would say, from my viewpoint, the answer is it depends, which is a bit of a cop-out, right? But I really do believe it does depend. I've worked most of my years in security within the financial industry, which you would think wouldn't outsource a lot of stuff, but the truth of the matter is, I think we all outsource some things. In our case, we outsource guard services to watch our doors. That's one thing. We outsource pen tests because they have to be third-party and independent. We outsource scanning activities. There's actually a lot that we outsource. In terms of a managed security service, which I think might have been the intent of the question, I think it depends a lot upon the industry. Some industries are going to make that really hard to do in terms of the kinds of questions they might ask you around how much knowledge do you have around that. But I would say that it's not a black and white question. That in fact, there's a lot of outsourcing that goes on in our day-to-day. Probably most everyone in the room outsources elements of their security. And I tend to talk about it that way when I talk with the executive management of the business. When they talk about outsourcing, it's not a black and white line, it's a continuum, and you decide where the right line is, and business and value drive it.
Yep.
Anything you want to add there, Bill?
We use that for building out capabilities that we don't yet have, and aren't sure whether we want to build a core competency around that. In other cases, there's regulatory concerns or constraints that say it has to be a third party. In some cases, I will augment a service that we do with a managed service and compare and use that as sort of a checkpoint. So like, am I biased? Am I missing something? Did they come in with a fresh perspective? So we will do A/B testing of things like that, either internally or between vendors.
Great. We have a question over here.
Yes. My name is Mark Brown. I'm with the Middle Tennessee ISSA chapter. And recently I co-authored a paper with several other professors from Lipscomb University here in town regarding internships and co-op opportunities for information security professionals. One of the things that we found in that paper was that there's really this chicken and egg kind of conundrum that you guys have talked a little bit about today on the panel, that you're looking for experienced information security pros, and you're willing to develop them, but not necessarily developing them while they're still in college through internship and co-op opportunities in information security. Can you address that and also talk about when you talk about developing the next team of, or next set of information security professionals with your peers, how do you convince them that it's important to invest in those kinds of opportunities for folks that are still in college?
Great question. Who wants to take it?
I think one of the interesting things about the era that we live in now is it used to be that you had to buy well-known vendor products and services in order to bring them into a company. And for the last, I don't know, 10 or 15 years or so, it's been much more openly accepted to have open source initiatives. And it's much easier now for someone to both contribute to an open source effort or to start one up that didn't exist prior. And this is an opportunity for the person who's not yet a professional but has excellent, let's say, coding skills. He could contribute, meaningfully contribute to an open source effort and use that as essentially experience that says, look, I'm going to add value to your company. So that's a relatively new avenue that people can contribute and show results, because I think that's really sort of the heart of the question is, if I'm a hiring manager, how do I know what your past experience is? What results can you bring to my organization? And that's a relatively new avenue that you can have huge impact on the course of a piece of software that gets used potentially in thousands of companies.
I'm a huge proponent of cooperative education. I actually did it twice when I was going to school, and I ended up working for both companies that I co-opted for. One was GE and the other was Rockwell. So I'm a big proponent, and I think that it absolutely has a place in security as well as the rest of IT. And there are plenty of jobs where a young student who is working their way through school, even while they're in school during their junior year, and maybe even before, for them to take roles within security. There are a lot of operational jobs within security, and there are also some junior level jobs. In our organization, we have compliance opportunities, risk opportunities, operational, firewall type of things, access management. You guys know that there's a lot of work that can be done in it, and it can't all be senior level people. And then finally, if you're not bringing in young people into your organization, that's a real bad mistake, long term.
I agree. I think it's a must-do, and they bring ideas, they bring energy, just people who are eager and wanting to be sponges to learn. I think it's a great thing to mix in. If you can team them up with more seasoned people, it can really be a great environment. And I think there may be some people from HCA who are smiling right now, because just last night I sent an email to several managers because we have several open positions, and I'm like, how much better would we be off if we had just brought in an intern or somebody right out of college who had spent the last 6 months trying to learn this, rather than waiting for 6 months trying to find somebody with 10 years of experience. And Mark, you'll be happy to know we have 4 interns right now, and I think 3 of them are from the program at Lipscomb. So I think it's a must-do, and it creates a cycle of sort of regenerating the organization.
Question here.
Yes, Vern Williams from Austin, Texas. And in light of the bring your own everything and file your data wherever, How do you see standards like ISO 27000 series, the FISMA 800-53 fitting in, and what do you use to guide your efforts and put a framework around the security that you implement?
So
Who wants to start that one?
yeah, so I guess I'll go out on a limb and say, frankly, I haven't seen public standards be particularly helpful so far, to be completely honest and transparent with you. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like we're all going to look at our mobile phones in a couple of years the same way the pizza delivery guy looks at his car. In other words, you're going to have to own one because pretty soon that's going to be that kind of seems to be the way it's going. My approach with this hasn't been to rely upon public standards, and in fact, it's been around the data. It's been around how do we encapsulate the data so that the data, if it's not on a device that we control and administer, it's at least on a virtual portion of that device that we absolutely do control and administer.
I would say that we're similar. I think we look at everything that's out there and try to pick the parts that we feel apply to us and that we can use to our benefit, but I can't say that we hold up any one particular standard as the model that we're following.
Yeah, that's pretty similar for us, where we will glean, like you said, we'll glean ideas or inspirations or controls and say, that's applicable to us. That makes a lot of sense. That's culturally compatible with what we're trying to accomplish. But yeah, it's about the data. And one of the things we tell people is you should leave the data on the secured servers, the secure applications. You shouldn't be working on it on these other devices unless you absolutely have to. And then we've got another set of controls that you should implement if you need to do that. And again, it's not meant to be a friction element, but the interpretation from people is, well, that sounds really complicated, so I'll just do that first thing you said, which is the easier approach, which is just leave it over there.
I have one last question here before we need to close, but one of the questions from the audience had to do with managed service providers. And even if you're not incorporating managed service providers into your overall strategic plan, how are you working with vendors? Or let me ask you this, how is the best way to work with your security technology providers? I mean, vendors talk a lot about partnering with their user companies such as yours. Can you give us any parting pieces of advice on good ways to really leverage the expertise of your vendors to your organization's advantage?
I think one example is where we needed to do some security awareness and education, and we're a highly automated environment. And back when I was looking at the available options, there were some open source options that weren't very robust that would do, let's say, like employee phishing campaigns. And the service providers that we were looking at did a great job, but we couldn't easily tie our systems to their systems. And so we actually worked with one vendor where we helped them build an API. And so then we could automate both the reporting and the generation of phishing campaigns. And so this was really helpful because then I didn't have to have a particular analyst who was reading spreadsheets and copying and pasting data. It was built right into our analytics engine. And so we can get real-time results of how a phishing campaign is working. And as new employees are added to our system, they're just automatically added to the next pool. So again, I didn't want to build out this capability, but I needed this capability. So I partnered with a particular vendor, and we helped them innovate their product because they said, well, we'd like the API thing, but we don't know how many other customers, well, we know other customers want this, but no one's really pushed us for this capability. So this was an opportunity for us to do a partnership.
Great. Scott or Paul, working with vendors?
I guess I'll go next, Paul. We could kind of go down the line here. I would say that we use vendors more as a tip of a wedge. They help us accelerate with the implementation of things that we consider strategic. I tend not to get too involved with vendors as we talk about strategy and strategic direction and vision. in that their strategic vision and direction is governed by market forces that lie outside my interest space. The company's strategy may or may not align with the next shiny thing, so I use vendors and how they can help me to do things that I don't have staff on board already to help me do, or we're not sufficiently skilled in a particular area. And if I plan on that being long-term, we will actually outsource it. Maybe we'll do IDS from the outside, certain portions of it. But generally, the vendors can help me by helping me meet some really exacting time frames that fit into a larger strategy which we formulate.
I agree with the sentiments. I think there are areas where a vendor can really provide a lot of additional insight and information because they've really taken a deep dive into a specific area that we have not had the luxury or maybe the skills or even just the bandwidth to really dive into it. So there's times where it can be incredibly valuable, and Bill, I think you used the word partner multiple times when you're talking about it, and to me that's the difference. There's some cases where technology is almost a commodity, and you just go with the cheapest or the best or the fastest or whatever, but there's some other areas, and I think some key areas in the security or information protection area that there are areas where you want to build those partnerships, and because it's not that they're selling a hammer and everybody has the same nail. I mean, you've got to find ways to take ideas and technologies that they have and make them work in your unique environment, and everybody's environment has some ways of being unique. So those are where it's the greatest value to us. We have some that I would truly call partners, that they really understand what we're trying to do. We've had a long-term relationship with them. They're not just bringing their hammer to our situation every time.
Terrific. Well, I want to give our panelists a big round of applause. You great panel, appreciate it. Thank you all. And a round of applause for your attention to the audience. Thank you. And we're done.